Welcome back to Her Rules Radio. I'm Alex Jamieson, your hostess. I've been a life, health, and success coach for almost 2 decades. And one topic that doesn't get enough attention is the relationship between early childhood trauma and abuse and our ability to be happy, healthy, and successful adults. So today's show, I think, is incredibly important and really fills a gap for a lot of us. Now, we're going to be talking about early childhood sexual trauma a little bit with my incredible guest, Dr. Rosenna Bakari. She's an author, an advocate, and a scholar. She's been writing about and helping people around centering and breaking the silence of sexual violence and helping adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She's not just a survivor, she's a thriver and a psychologist, and she knows how to help people go through and process their early trauma and find strength and thrive after it. And in my research around this topic, what I really found was that, as Dr. Bakari will share more about, that the healthiest response to childhood emotional wounds is also one of the rarest responses, which is that we don't always feel our feelings. We can't process and let them go and heal them until we are allowed to feel them. That acknowledging them, not squashing them, not covering them up, acknowledging them and feeling them is the way to healing them and trying on a new set of patterns, a new way of being. Now, a lot of us maybe grew up with early childhood traumas and we were told to not cry. We were told, you're okay, don't feel bad. Our upset was upsetting to others, or we weren't believed, or our upset or our hurt just brought out a negative response in the people around us. So we learned to hide our emotions. We learned to tune out our bodies. So today's conversation may bring up some real feelings emotionally and physically for you. And I really encourage you to look up Dr. Bakari's book, Too Much Love Is Not Enough, a memoir of silence of childhood sexual abuse. This conversation was really important and lovely, and I hope that it's as helpful to you as it was to me. Here we go. Too Much Love Is Not Enough, an amazing memoir of the silence of childhood sexual abuse. Dr. Bakari, thank you so much for being here with us on Her Rules Radio.
Thank you. I'm excited to have a chat with you.
Yeah. Now you are an author, a multi-time author, a speaker, and with a PhD in psychology, you're a college professor at the University of Colorado. You've been an advocate and a scholar, and you're really a role model and a voice for those whose life experiences have been steeped in many challenges of different oppressions, including race, gender, sexual violence. And you're really an expert on building bridges between men and women and supporting people who've been through different traumas. And you have been writing every day for how long?
10 years.
10 years.
Yes.
To really bring a voice to what is such a challenging topic for many, which is different flavors of trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my writing has been geared specifically toward adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And of course, we know there's a lot of crossover, but there's a reason that I write specifically for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And what's that reason?
That reason is because I started writing as a result of living openly as an incest survivor. And I started living open in 2007, spent the next couple of years figuring out what the heck that meant. And once I figured that out, I thought that there were 40 million people out there that needed this information and needed to understand the value of living openly, the value of dropping that secret as much as I did. The reason I write specifically for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse is that in doing all the research, I realized there were lots of resources for children. Like everybody wants to save the children from sexual abuse and all sorts of trauma. So there are plenty of resources. Now, albeit many of them are not good, but there are resources for children who are being violated in any way. There are also resources for adults who are violated. So if you report as an adult that something happened to you at your job or your school or your workplace or even in your home, you have a right to immediately seek legal help or mental health counseling. People will ask you what your needs are. So, and because they're more immediate.
Yeah.
When it came to adults who had been violated as children,
right,
there's a void.
Yeah.
There were no resources. And in 2010, literally, there were 2 online sites, both in Canada, that addressed adult survivors. There were none in America, even websites that were addressing specifically adult survivors. So there were some organizations like RAIN that include them. And it's always like this sort of little side piece you have to sneak in there. But there was nothing that actually targeted the voice or the trauma of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
That's astounding that there's so little support, because how many hundreds of millions of just Americans?
Just Americans. Right now, the number is 60 million, just Americans.
Yeah.
60 million survivors. When I started the work in 2010, there were 40 million adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. The good news to all of this is that the rate of childhood sexual abuse is on the decline. Now, there's still plenty of reason to be suspicious and argue about what the real rates are. But whatever the rates are, they are on a decline.
Okay.
So that's the good news. Mm-hmm. The bad news is that we still find that only approximately 20% or less of children who experience childhood sexual abuse, only 20%, 15 to 20% are identified. So even though it's on a decline, it's still a problem. You still have the majority of children turning into adult, reaching age 18 and over without anyone ever saying as much as, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. And what are just hearing you talk about that, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. And what are the impacts on human beings, not just of the trauma, but of becoming an adult and not having any help or support or compassion from other people around that?
So one of the things that happens when we live with the trauma of childhood sexual abuse is that you have to develop your own narratives in your head. And if no one's ever helped you navigate those, most of us, it's natural, we develop narratives of the violators.
What do you mean by that?
So, because if no one's ever helped you process this, then it becomes what are stories that we're told. It was your fault. Something's wrong with you. You deserve this. You're not good enough. You're a whore. Whatever these narratives are that were given to you verbally or non-verbally about your experience in this, if you never speak them, you never explore them, there's never anyone to challenge them.
Yeah.
So then you design a life that accommodates those narratives one way or another. Including, like me, you become this perfectionist. Well, I'll show you, I'll be pretty enough or strong enough or smart enough, or you're still living for a narrative, whether you do that in a positive way or a more dysfunctional way. Right. The narrative doesn't go away.
Right. Yeah. So just reading your bio, reading the things that you have done and created in your life, that you are a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo, that you homeschooled your children while getting your PhD with your husband. So that perfectionistic driven part of you was partially in reaction to the narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just thought that one or two things had to happen. There was something that I could do externally to make this go away, And if I couldn't make it go away, there was something that I could do to make people not know that it existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm having a hard time to find the words for a moment because I see this. It's so common.
Absolutely.
It's all around us. And how many people are walking around just needing a place or a space for support and love to heal.
And one of the reasons I created Talking Trees was to help people create language and find language. But what struck me in all the research that I did was it became clear that this experience were leading people to prison because they had never addressed issues and acting out on them. Also, addiction. There's very high correlation between addiction and childhood sexual abuse, between eating disorders and sexual abuse, domestic violence and sexual abuse. So there were all these negative correlations. And so that answered some of my questions when I asked, well, what are people doing with their silence? Like, oh, they're doing this. But then there was another piece that struck me that really urged me to do something because I knew none of those were my story. I've never been addicted. I've never been in a domestic violence situation. I've never been to prison. Like I didn't have any of those experiences. That scared me because that said to me, where are the people like me hiding?
Oh, interesting.
Because most survivors are not addicted, right? Correlation is not causation. So most of us are not addicted.
Right.
Most of us are not in prison. Most of us do not have this visible pain.
Right.
Yet, so, cause there are not 60 million people in prison or 60 million. So I'm like, well, where are the rest? Like I see that these people are accounted for. And those are the people that research have access to.
Right.
There's a whole lot more people hiding out there. And that was the piece that really prompted me to do the work.
Yeah. So tell us about Talking Trees.
Sure. So I created Talking Trees in 2010. Because I wanted to give voice to and for survivors. A lot of my work has revolved around creating language. Because when I started to live openly, I realized, well, there's no language for living openly. I never expected to have these conversations. I never put words to them. You just carry the heaviness and the weight of it and the feeling of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, we need words to talk about this. So as I read the research, the words were right there. The words were clear. That's really problematic too. That's probably another show. Like you get to be subjects, but the information doesn't disseminate down to you. That's really problematic.
Yeah.
So how do survivors get to be all these subjects, yet there's no space for us to come back to this information?
Right. Where's the empowerment, the claiming?
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take the information that I found in the research and somehow filter it down so survivors could benefit from the research that they're clearly participating in.
Yeah.
Right.
Really.
And so that was one of the main purposes. So calling us survivors and not victims, that's really important.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Clarifying as a psychologist, clarifying to adults what childhood should have looked like. So people don't go around saying, what if I liked it? And I go, what did you like? Well, I got a lot of attention. I felt special. It made me feel like a big person. But I was like, wow, that's great. Do you know that all children are entitled to that?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's really a different reality.
Right. But, and explaining to people, guess what? It's not just you. It's not just me. The average number of violators before the age of 18 is actually 3, not 1. Oh my God. The heaviness that came off of me when I realized it was not just me who had been that stupid to allow this thing to happen 3 times. But if you've never had conversation about it,
how would you know? Right.
So there's no one feeding this. So I wanted to feed this information and go, guess what? It's not just you. The average violator has the average survivor has 3 violators. I did too. What about you? Oh, wow. I had 4. Oh, then there's actually conversation. It's like, okay. There's some normalcy to this experience of what should never have happened and should have been abnormal. I did not know that most survivors were violated by someone in the family. I did not know that. 80% of childhood sexual abuse is incest. No one will even say the word incest.
Yeah.
So all this so-called stuff that we're having a movement. How are we having a movement? No one will even say the word incest.
Right.
So the only time that we talk about childhood sexual abuse is when we're talking about strangers or sexual harassment in the workplace.
Right. Or religion. It's happening in your church.
Right. It's happening everywhere, but in the home.
Right.
We have not even begun to address the sexual abuse that's happening in the home.
Yeah.
The boogeyman is already in the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to write about those experiences so that survivors had a chance at real healing.
Yeah. And, I have a different constellation of flavors of childhood trauma, but one of the things you write about in your incredible treasure trove of writing, especially on medium.com, on the ascent there, how people with a history of trauma can hold patterns of this hypervigilance in relationships. When I read that, I was like, ding, ding, ding. We hold, and we physically hold it in our bodies, and we physically hold it in our systems. It becomes a pattern in us that we then bring into every relationship that we have. So how did you begin to heal that and live differently?
That's been honestly the hardest. And that's probably the thing that continues to linger over me and I work on. I wish it weren't work.
I wish it was easy.
It's not. It's really challenging for me. I am so fortunate to be married to a very, very patient man. Not a perfect man. See, you're not perfect. You're just patient. So that has helped. But I have gone through relationships with friends, and so this hypervigilance, you think it's you being a survivor. No, that's how it is. That's how you protect yourself. No, I'm not. We create boundaries. These are just boundaries and no one can get to do that. And so it is really challenging to see it because it feels so natural.
Right.
And so normal and how the entire world operates.
And it's how I've survived. So I better hold on to this tool.
Right. And what will it look like if you let it go?
Oh my gosh.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And not to mention that when we talk about the effects of childhood trauma, it's literally a brain changer.
Yes.
So I think even times when I can consciously think about it, my brain doesn't let me act that out.
Yeah.
And so it's just a constant awareness. I've learned how to say, I didn't mean it. I learned how to say, I'm sorry. My husband can change me in an instant. He'll just say, calm down. And I do. He doesn't raise up to my level of hyper alertness or angst, and so he's just done that naturally. That's helped. But when you have people in your life that are patient with you and you finally get it, but I'm telling you, that has been the last piece for me of the puzzle that's just been short. There's some other pieces I don't see yet, but that's been the piece that has been the most difficult for me to see.
Right.
Is how my relationships look. That's one of the reasons I started writing about it so much on Medium.
Yeah.
It's I'm getting to really understand this now and look at it in a way that still feels uncomfortable, but I know I'm going to be okay. But it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And I just want to underline that so that people who are listening, who are resonating with this conversation, begin to have some patience and self-compassion for themselves as they endeavor to change and heal, because it does take time and it takes support and it takes screwing up and trying again and believing over and over again that you're worthy
and putting yourself in the best thing you can do for yourself. And this piece I've always been good at is putting yourself in environments where you are allowed to make mistakes.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do you begin to, what are we talking about? What kind of environments are we talking about?
Your relationships, where you work, where you hang out, where you play. I'll give you an example. Before I met my husband, I was in a relationship with someone for quite a long time, and it didn't work out. One of the reasons the main reason it didn't work out is because every time we ignited each other. So unlike my husband, every time he was upset, I was upset. Every time I was upset, he was upset. So it just like we were horrible at bringing each other back to homeostasis.
Got it.
That's just not. And so if you're in a relationship where you don't balance each other, but you mirror each other instead, that may not be the most productive relationship with you.
Right.
The same thing if you withdraw, right? If you just, something happens and you both just withdraw and go away and never talk to each other for another week, that may not be the best thing either.
Yeah.
So trying to find someone that says it's okay for you to be this way.
Right.
You know, and I don't have to punish you because you're this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's both our romantic relationships and our friendships, you know, finding people over time that you can be honest with and also trust them to, you know, not get into some weird codependent thing with you.
Right. Right. And they don't have to stay. This is the most important lesson I have learned. People don't have to stay in your life.
What?
Don't require that. Don't expect it. Don't. Even with my husband, we have had conversations where we've said, you know, we don't have to stay. And so as long as you're here, know that I'm here because I want to be, not because I feel in any way in my heart that I'm obligated to stay with you.
Yeah.
I am okay with leaving whenever this no longer works for us.
Yeah.
And so if you're here, it's because I know that you really want to be here.
Right.
No one is required to stay. As you grow, if you are not outgrowing some of your relationships, like none of your relationships you've outgrown.
Yeah. Yeah.
That could be a cue.
Isn't that really interesting? I was just having this conversation over the holidays with my oldest friend. We've known each other since we were 5. And there aren't very many people that I've held on to that long besides family members.
Right.
That, by the way, I mean, let's talk about cutting the cord with family members.
You are not required to stay in any relationship.
What? Even the engineer is like nodding his head in the background. Like,
any relationship. I'll tell you a story. Do you have time for a story?
Oh, yes, we do.
Early in my therapy, when I went to therapy, finally got into therapy where I was going to make this thing, where I was committed to it. And one of the triggers was that it was time for me. I was going to go home for Christmas as I had done. And I still had 2 violators living at that time, still buying gifts and having dinners with violators. That's not okay, people. That's not okay. And so, and it was just triggering me in ways I couldn't hold back. I had lost a brother of mine that I was really close to. So the stress of losing him and then going home and it was a pull, a tug. It was overwhelming. So I went to my therapist and I just explained, I was like, I can't go. I can't look at violators one more time. Like I don't have the strength. I can't do it. And I sobbed like only a survivor can sob. Right? And she looked at me and she's like, well, what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer to that question. I want you to understand at this point, I had a PhD. I had a black belt. I had like all these, I'm living a real grown up life, a true, real successful grown up life. I'm in my therapist's office crying like I'm 7 years old. I don't have the answer to this simple question. What are you going to do? You don't want to go in a space where people have harmed you. Right. What do you want to do? I don't know. Like looking back at it now, I'm like, that's mind boggling. Right. But people continue to live this experience every day. And she finally said to me, you do realize you don't have to go. Right. And I just sobbed like that. I'm not lying when I say that thought never occurred to me.
Yeah.
The thought that I did not have to go.
Nobody teaches that.
No one had ever given me permission to discount family.
Right.
Are you kidding? I've been living the last 40 years with this for like that.
That's like the ultimate taboo. I mean, one of the ultimate taboos is like cutting off your family. No, you will suffer forever.
Right. Who's going to love you now?
No, right.
you know?
What kind of a person am I?
Right.
If I cut off my mom or my brother
and I didn't go. I didn't go. It was my first step. Like I didn't go. Yeah. And that was my first step toward empowerment, was not going.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm going through something similar with my husband and an unnamed person on his family. And we're talking with my son, who's 13, about it. And we're letting him know, like, this is a really bad relationship. And it's really hard to admit, and nobody talks about this, but it doesn't feel good to be around these people. So we're not going to take you there anymore, because we don't want you to be subjected to the teasing and the traumatizing that goes on in these homes.
Right.
And you're just making me think, like, oh, we are changing the pattern. We're finally doing it, even only with our kid. Like, we haven't been able to do it for ourselves yet, but we're demonstrating it for him. So that's progress.
Right. My daughter was about 13 when I told her, you want to know her response? This is my daughter's response. So she said, let me get this right. She said, you were violated at 7 and you're 47 and this time approximately. She's like, for 40 years, you've been doing this? And I said, yeah. She said, why? And I said, because I thought I needed them. She said, I've known for 40 seconds and I know you don't need them.
Well, that's just a testament to you raising her with like really respectful boundaries. Yes. That's amazing.
I said, well, clearly you're smarter than me.
From the mouths of babes. That's awesome. Okay. So how can you offer this great advice in one of your pieces, and it pertains to what we're just talking about here, giving yourself permission to fail and forgiving yourself when you do. Because this process of really taking care of ourselves and disconnecting from toxic people, few people ever even attempt that. And in the process of creating boundaries, we're going to not do it perfectly.
Right.
So how can we get the support that we need to be brave and actually do these things and screw it up and do it imperfectly, but, grow from these lessons of failure? Like, how do you construct the support?
So one of the steps that I had to take, the diversions from this, the more I dug into this work, as much as I wanted to only focus on survivors, only that, it came a point where I had to recognize that the overwhelming majority of victims who haven't entered the path, but victims in general, are women. And the overwhelming number of violators are men. Not all. Right. There are certainly male victims. There are certainly female violators. But overwhelmingly, this is a gender issue.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, I had to take it somewhere. I had to then begin looking at women and how this and it's not just here, but all over the world. Right. So it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when I started asking myself questions like that, I kept bumping into the gender issue. And I'm like, what are the messages that women get?
Yeah.
To do this. Yeah. And so I know, for example, when males who are dealing with this are much more likely to turn toward addiction, to be involved in addiction. They're also much more likely to commit suicide. So it's serious. I don't mean to dismiss that at all. I really don't. But it's a difference in resources and what becomes available to you and how you then see your power as a woman. So one of the things that happens, for example, when females have this experience, when males have this experience, they have other options to deal with their experience, right? Not that they're pretty or whatever, but they have other options. One of the problems and difficulties and challenges of women is that we deal with this experience, we get to be grown-ups, and we keep dealing with the experience. Like, men don't keep being victims when they're adults. They don't keep being vulnerable as men. They grow, they can. I mean, it depends. But I mean, there's not a society that says to them, this is what should have happened to you. There is nothing to men that says this is who you are as this embodied like this. Unfortunately, for women in the world that we live in, and I do mean world, not just America, we have this experience, and then you get to be a woman, and then you have to always protect yourself from having that experience again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So while you're doing that, you then also have these messages that, and by the way, be nurturing, and by the way, do this. So like the messages, so then the messages that we get are embedded within this experience of secrecy and shame and not owning your body and all this other stuff that comes with it. So I had no choice but to begin doing gender work around women and the messages that we get and freeing ourselves from these voices and helping women to really understand what body autonomy looks like, to be completely and totally responsible for what happens from the crown of your head to the bottom of your feet, where you place yourself in the world physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically. Yeah. And so really beginning to unravel some. I think unless we're willing to do that, then the progress is a little slower.
You know, owning our bodies, taking responsibility for our own physical well-being, and really having a sense of sovereignty over our physical self and our own healing.
Right.
What have been the foundational ways that you had to learn how to take care of your physical self? Because you're not just healing and learning for you. You're creating spaces. You're writing. You're a creator. You're a teacher. You're a mom. You're a partner. You do all these things, and you have to take care of your physical self as you're like, right, as you said, you're still like the relationship dynamic. You're still like in the work there. So you're still doing your own work and you're doing all this other great stuff.
Right.
So what have been the foundational self-care techniques that you rely on?
Something happened when I started training for Taekwondo, honestly. And I've written pieces on, even on Medium, like what would happen if women saw themselves as protectors rather than the person who needed to be protecting? Because again, that's another narrative, right? That we have to live with. Right. And so what would happen if someone told us every morning that it was our job to go out and protect something, to create something, to make something? Right. Not versus it's your job to go out and care for something. Right. Right. And in the midst of caring, if something horrible happens to you, then you just forgive and move on and you don't deal with that, because just keep caring. Right. And so when I learned to be a protector of my space, it changed the way I saw the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple of women on the show in the last few years who are self-defense teachers for women. Yep. And I specifically did an interview right around when our current president was elected, because a lot of women's old sexual trauma came up. Yep. I was like, get yourself to a self-defense course, like feel the power that's available to you. Yep. That's great. Okay. So you're still training.
I still train. Yeah. Yes. It's important. Yeah. So I'm constantly reminded, I'm constantly in touch again with my body, the right to defend. Another secret that we don't tell as survivors, part of where the guilt and shame came from, it took a while for me to get to this piece in therapy, is that no one says it's okay not to do that. Oftentimes in situations, people don't even scream. Right. When you're overwhelmed. So you don't even use your voice. That's where some of the shame comes from, by the way. This idea that this disbelief that you could have done something or you could have done more and you did nothing, as opposed to saying you should never have been put in a position where you even had to whisper it. Right. Right. Yeah. But again, that responsibility comes in and no one helps us with the narrative because we're not having conversations about it. Yeah. Right. So that changes when I say to myself, I have a right to do this. And these are the things that I have a right to do about it. It just then becomes very different. I'm in a totally different space with it.
That's amazing. I could talk to you for another hour. I wish we had more time. Your books and your writing are available on your website. We're going to put the link up in our show notes so people can go right to you. Your book, Too Much Love Is Not Enough, is an incredible memoir. And one final question I wanted to ask you. So my show is called Her Rules Radio, where women go to learn how to live life by their own rules. You've demonstrated that beautifully for us here, like learning to be the protector is really a powerful stance. What is a rule that you see a lot of people living by that you would like to rewrite? Maybe a should or an old way of patterning that people are playing along with that you're like, nope, we shouldn't do that anymore?
I wish that people could practice within themselves seeing the feminine divine in everything that they do, from not constantly referring to God as he, to not referring to men as protectors, to not constantly putting women and children in the same sentence as if they are on the same level.
Women and children first.
Right. As if they're on the same level. They're the one thing, right? They're one thing. So we have no more power than a child. Right. So people must protect us. How about people stop violating us so we don't need protection? So the thing that I wish would change would be that women see themselves as the sovereign. Yeah. Like we are not second to anyone. Right. The world cannot exist with one half of the brain ruling it.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody listening who was touched and inspired by this goes immediately and gets your book, Too Much Love Is Not Enough, and checks out your website. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening in again this week to Her Rules Radio. If you love the show or think it would be helpful to someone you know and love, send them a link to the show. And we always love seeing new reviews. If you could leave a sentence or two of why this show is helpful or meaningful to you, that would be great. Just go on over to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts from and leave a few thoughts about what this show has brought up for you and why you find it valuable. See you back soon. Mwah.